أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. We seek refuge in Allah from the accursed shaitan. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, most merciful, especially merciful. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana. Glory be to you, O Allah. There is no knowledge for us except that which you teach us. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una. O Allah, teach us that which will be beneficial for us. Wa zidna ilma, and increase us in knowledge. وَرُزُقْنَا فَهْمًا, and grant us understanding. يَا مُقَلِّبَ الْقُلُوبِ, O change of heart. ثَبِّتْ قُلُوبَنَا عَلَى دِينِكَ, keep our hearts firm on your deen. اللهم اجعل أعمالنا خالصة لوجهك. O Allah, grant our actions to be done sincerely for your sake. ولا تجعل فيها حظا لغيرك, and let there not be in them a portion for other than you. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. We welcome you to this evening's session on understanding men and masculinity, a very interesting topic indeed. And our presenter this evening will be Dr. Shahieda Jansen, who is a clinical psychologist and acting regional director of UNISA, Western Cape. She practiced as a registered nurse, midwife, and psychiatric nurse, and then qualified as a psychologist. Dr. Shahieda Jansen served as the director of the Counseling Center of the University of the Western Cape, where she coordinated the counseling services of the student body and trained psychology interns at a master's level. Her research specialties are masculinized personal development for boys and men, and the practical adaptation of indigenous theories of human nature. Her book, Masculinity Meets Humanity, an adapted model of masculinized psychotherapy, has recently been published by UNISA Press. So she's going to tell us a little bit more about her book as well, and how we can get hold of that at the end of the session as well. So before we start, I just want to let you all know that Muslims Connected will also be hosting a marriage course starting on the 24th of November. You will get the information of that in our WhatsApp groups. But just to inform you that we have an upcoming marriage workshop and many more exciting courses. So please stay tuned to the notices. So I'll now hand over to Dr. Shahieda Jansen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
Thank you so much, sister. Thank you for welcoming me so well. Let me just share my screen so that I can start going right into the presentation. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, you can.
All right. So let me start right with my presentation. Let me start with greetings. So I greet you with the universal greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. Goeienaand almal. Molweni nonke. Sanbonani. Dumelang. Sawubona bahlobobam. So with those greetings, I hope that I have welcomed everybody. Now, in this presentation, what I'm planning to do is I'm going to start by, I will start with some definitions. I will define things like, what do I mean by belonging? I will also first describe what do I mean by masculinized psychotherapy. Then I will go into what is the most important aspect of the therapy that I do, and that is the humanization process. Why is it that I start with my clients, whether it is with men or women, whether it is in groups or individual? I first start with what in psychology would be referred to as a cultural formulation. So I first start by humanizing the process. And that is what I'm going to explain. And then thereafter, I will go into some practical things that, what do I do, with men, and why should men be a special therapeutic population? So that's going to be the outline of my presentation. So, and I'm going to try to be I'm going to try to speak for about 20 minutes so that in half an hour by the most, I hope, Masood, if you can time me, because I want to rather open the floor, for some exchanges and discussions. All right, so that's what I'm planning to do. As just how I frame this humanization. What do I mean by a theory of humanity or a theory of human nature? And then after that, I will just go into some of the practicalities. So does that? I hope that I'm still audible. So let me just continue. So in this presentation, I will start with, in 2018. I was doing a presentation at the gender conference in Stellenbosch University. And after my presentation, one of the delegates, a male, he came up to me at the, after my presentation, and he made a very interesting observation. He said to me, he found it very interesting that I can so confidently state that men are emotionally competent. Now, up till that point, I wasn't aware, that I'm saying, men are emotionally competent with such confidence. But I must say, I think that day when this man came up to me, to say this to me, it did put something in my mind. So 2 years later, an editorial of mine, now it's not a real journal article. It's a very short sort of, when you have something interesting to say, they normally give you the editorial, right at the beginning of the journal. So there's about a 2-pager in which I then wrote up this article that is with the title, Men Are Emotionally Competent. And I've got the link there at the bottom. And so if you Google this, you'll be able to get to the link. And it is this article actually that is the subject of this presentation, because what I wish to do in this presentation is to share with you very practically, how do I work with men and what is it that I do, and why do I do what I do? And particularly, perhaps I need to say, why is it that I say men are emotionally competent? So what I'm going to start with is some definition. So when I use the word African, I mean an African identity has got nothing to do with the color of one's skin. But what an African identity is based on 2 fundamental pillars. It is based on the pillar of relationship, relationality, and the pillar of morality. So in other words, to be an African means that you see yourself in relational, ethical terms, that you always see yourself as belonging and that you are continuous with your surroundings. Now, that brings me then to the concept of belonging. Now, the minute I say I belong to something, it means then that there are rules of engagement. So in other words, for me, belonging is not just a relationship. Belonging is a relationship and it's an ethic. Because the minute I belong to you, immediately I am implicated in your well-being. Because that, for me, belonging is not warm and fuzzy. Well, warm and fuzzy may be part of belonging, but belonging is not reduced to a psychological construct. Belonging is a socio-spiritual construct. It is a complex construct. It means that when I say that I belong, that I'm connected to you, that you are my sister, that you are my brother, immediately there are obligations, because belonging is a responsibility, it's an accountability, it's an ethic. All right. So that's the other concept that I want to clarify before I go any further. Now the last concept that I need to clarify before I start with this presentation is the concept masculinized psychotherapy. Now, when you have a group, and the minute you say a psychotherapy group, the minute you remove women from that group, there are several things that now take place. There are several principles now that you need to take note of as a psychotherapist. So when you remove women and there are only men in that group, then it means now that in the absence of women, men are then freed. They get liberated from their socialized scripts of how they ought to behave in the presence of women. Because throughout the world, men are socialized that when they're in the presence of women, they then play certain roles of providers or protectors. And so when women then leave the space, then in the psychotherapeutic context, it means then that that man can then start to focus on himself. So the focus can then turn to the self and it can turn inward. So that's the first principle that I want to clarify. Then once women have left the room and there are only men left in that group, it then means that if this is a psychotherapy group, all the emotional tasks then that in that group becomes the responsibility of the men in that group. So in an emotion-focused group, and that's what I do, I run emotion-focused men's groups, is that once after we've now done the culture building, and we have broken the ice and we have agreed on the contracts of the rules and the values and people understand the purpose and so on. And there's been a culture has been built and there's some social cohesion, because that's the first task, right? At the beginning of the group. In fact, the group members are told that you do not disclose sensitive and personal information when you come to a men's group. At the beginning, the first part or the first session is really run like a workshop, because the task of that first group is to build a culture and to actually to settle people down. You must understand purpose, you must understand why you're here, and you need to know what is expected of you, how you're going to behave in that group. So just to make that clear, right? So once those initial, group tasks are done, then the men in that group has to start feeling sadness, disappointment, confusion, helplessness, not knowing, the betrayal, the injustice. So they then have to start engaging and sit with feelings, reflect feelings to one another, help to clarify certain feelings, exchange stories of sadness, of tragedy, etc. Because the purpose of the group is to go near sensitive and particularly negative emotions, because that is what allows one to transform. All right, because so the groups that I run, the explicit purpose and what I contract with men is that you will come into this group so that you can engage yourself to shift via emotion. That is what I mean by emotion focus, and they refer to it as EFT, right? Emotion focused therapy. So that's one of the theories that I apply in the group. Now, the third thing that happens, because now there's no women in that group, is that the men can now engage their feelings, their emotions, in a male consistent way. It means then that they can engage their sadness, their joy, their disappointment, or whatever they want to express in accordance to their own lived experiences as men. And so a man may start to explain his feelings using a satellite, or he may use a car, a Jaguar or something. So I usually find, I'm a bit fascinated when I see how men do this, how they start engaging the feelings within their male symbols. All right. And that is very important, because you have removed the women. All right. Which allows men then to deal with the feelings at their pace, with their male symbols, and with their style. So maybe they want to deal with their feelings also in a more action-orientated manner, or they want to deal with their feelings sadness, but they want to mix it with jokes. All right. So the removal of a woman, then the absence of a woman, actually sets in motion quite a few principles that can be quite useful therapeutically. So those were some of the terms that I wanted to explain to you. What I mean by African, that Africanness is about relationality and ethics, that belonging is an ethic, not just a relationship, and that masculinized psychotherapy is a special therapy in the absence of women, where men are allowed to engage the process of emotional engagement and personal transformation within their own worldview, their own culture, and their own values hierarchy. So that's the first thing that I wanted to clarify. All right. So the first thing that I then do in the therapy that I do with men is that whether it's on the phone, when the guy calls me, and he says that he wants to come and see me for therapy, or whether it's in the first session of a men's group, or whether I'm sitting with a father and a son, the first thing that I do is to address the whole human being. Now, what do I mean by the whole human being? Now, in our local cultures here, among some of our cultures, they use the term umoya. Now, umoya can mean wind, but normally when they point at you as umoya, it means that you are this spiritual being. All right. Now, so the first thing that I define, and the assumptions that I make then of a woman or a man, in this instance now I'm talking about men, is that irrespective of the brokenness that a man may approach me with, that the first assumptions that I make of him is that he is this whole being. He is a social spiritual being. He is radically attached, that he has got this dynamic, vibrating, uncontainable, resilient energy. All right. So in other words, that the first part of my engagement with a man is to affirm that at his core, he is a social spiritual being. So in other words, we know that we are separate. Most of the cultures in the world comes from a relational understanding of themselves, right? So whether you are there in the Far East, the Buddhist, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Japanese, that whole Southeast Asia, that whole Eastern Europe, right? If you go to the other side, the whole of South America, parts of North America, and parts of Europe, the whole of the African continent, whether they call themselves Arabs in the north, we see ourselves as extensions. There's a self, no doubt we are separate, but we are continuous with everything around us. And so this then brings in quite a few assumptions. So this energy, this core base fundamental aspect of the self that is radically connected and radically attached. Because remember, we are separate, but we are also not, we are continuous. So that paradox, right? It's important to understand, because that same spirituality is expressed as a body. So we are embodied beings, all right? And then that same energy, core energy, is expressed as a brain. And that energy, that core energy, that umoya, is also expressed as a backbone. Amandla omtu in isiXhosa. So you will say to a person, unamandla, you have power. So you refer to that person's backbone. And that power is your ability to actually stand up for the truth, the ability to make just choices to walk away from something but it's also that part of yourself that can become very humble and fold up into a fetal position to humble yourself, to learn, to say you're sorry. So each part of this core energy, has got two opposite poles. And so that animal, and it's a beautiful term in isiXhosa, isitunzi, where the sun doesn't shine. All right, we in the Arabic understanding of the self, we refer to this as our animal. And remember, in that tradition, a human being is then seen to be positioned between an animal and an angel, right? You can go higher than an angel, and you can, or like, locally people say, we can actually animals can become ashamed of our behavior. And so it gives us a sense then of our nature, that there's this wide spectrum and that we are multidimensional. So I'm introducing you, and that's why I call it the Afro-Eastern model of the self, because I had combined the Middle Eastern multidimensionality of the self, and then I combined it with a local Xhosa tradition, and I took I combined, and you can see for each dimension that we have in the Arab understanding of the self, for each one of them, you actually have in our local tradition, there's a name. Inclusio is your heart. And we know now today that science can show evidence that there is vibrational connections between the heart and the brain, right? And so your emotions is not just psychological. Your emotions is spiritual emotions. Your body has got a spiritual dimension. And so your id, right? The animal part of yourself. And so all these parts of the selves are interconnected. And if you start working, for example, on the body, it starts to affect the mind. In turn, it also affects the heart, your emotions. And so there is this multidimensional, integrated aspect to human nature. So we are complex, and therefore it is difficult to be a human being. All right. So now, how does this personhood then serve the male client? Why is personhood important? Why is it important that I first introduce the client to a self? Now, let me just make it clear, all right, that when the client come into the therapy room, all right, I put aside, I just delay for a few minutes, not long. We don't spend hours on this kind of thing. I just delay going to the presenting problem for about 5 minutes, all right? And then I usually interactively, include the client in this part of the discussion. So I may then have a Hindu client that will start identifying, with these different aspects of the self. And he may speak about Atma, one of the understandings in these traditions about a part of the self that transcends the ego and the mind. All right. And so you see when I work with different clients from different traditions, it then welcomes the clan, the culture, the amatokolosh, or whatever cultural phenomena is actually part of the self, depending on the tradition that I am working with. All right. Hence, it actually operates as a cultural formulation in psychotherapy. And then I just need to point this out to you, before I go further, is that what I have noticed, is that we will spend a little time just to introduce this. because it will then stay in the room and then we will move on, But I often, especially in a men's group, I will introduce the group to this and they will start, engaging with it. But very soon, by themselves, they will start talking about the reason why they have come into the group. In other words, once I have humanized, once I have received the whole person, the person themselves now feels safe enough and they feel open enough to say, but this is why I'm here. No, I'm here. I want to talk about why I'm here. So I just want to make it clear that I hold the therapeutic frame and I'm very clear about what is the purpose of my engagement with a client. All right. So let me just reflect on what does this personhood model, what does it do when I first go into starting to talk about this radical attachment and the fact that this person belongs and that there's this wholeness. What does it do to the client? It means that instead of asking what is wrong with you, I first ask, who are you? All right. And I give an opportunity for the whole person to be in the room. It then means also that I can then welcome into the room the strengths and the resources that a client always brings with them into the therapeutic room. All right. Because clients do not just bring problems. They also bring their resilience. They bring cultural strategies that can facilitate the therapeutic process. All right. And so often we talk about client-centeredness without actually having affirmed who the client are. Can we be client-centered if we do not know? Can you engage in a change process if you don't know who the person is? If you don't have some understanding of where that person is coming from. All right. And then clients get to understand that they are radically attached beings. All right. That that the self is sociocentric, that we are not a separate, masterful, individualized individual. We are an individual, but we are always connected to everything that is around us. All right. But most important, because we are in a time where men are constructed as bumbling fools, oxygen thieves. We're beginning to say we can just actually go to a sperm bank. We don't need men. Men have become, redundant. They are no longer relevant. Because this is the kind of conversations that is going around, And so when I first do this kind of cultural formulation, it means then that I affirm that every human being, including men, at the core, that because you are spiritual at your core, can you catch spirit? You can't. So in other words, we are constant, dynamic, moving, resilient. Our nature is growth orientated. And central to us is to grow, is to change, is to take on a perspective. So in other words, or you can see now, I'm starting to make different assumptions about my client. I'm starting to have a different expectation. And most of all, it is at this human level that there's a common humanity between myself and the client. Because there I am in front of the client, and I am as human with all the failings, with all the vulnerability that comes with being human. Because as humans, if we go back to this picture, that we are both divine, but we also have a dark, a shadow, an animal self, and all of us. And it doesn't matter how much therapy you get, how old you become, how wise you have become. The animal in us, the id, that part of that dark, blind side of ourselves remain an ever-present risk. All right. And so that is the importance for me of first engaging with the humanity of the client. I'm just going to pause here. I don't know if there's a, how long have I spoken now? Because I don't want to, sure, it's already 8 o'clock, yeah. All right, so let me now try and just quickly now, I want to perhaps spend less time. So right from the start, when I received that call from a man, you know, there's a particular way in which I will engage him in that first conversation, just when he's on the phone with me. All right, I want to know, you know, I might say something like, okay, so you've made the call, you know, that is important because it means you've already changed. Because by the time you pick up that call to phone the psychologist, things has already been happening. You've come to the conclusion that you're not going to be able to solve this on your own. And for a man, that's quite a place to reach, all right? And that's what I will say, you know, and then I will check, you know, and I will start explaining what is required, you know, that you're going to be a partner in this. How are you? What are you bringing? You know, so I'm not just interested in the diagnosis. Of course, you know, we're going to get there. But at the beginning, when I, even just on the phone, there is a way in which I engage so that we can assess, is this the right place for this person to come? Because just because there's a problem and there's a crisis and there's a fallout, doesn't mean you're ready. Doesn't mean that's where you want to be, all right? And for me, I have sent a person away and to say, from my assessment, you know, it seems like you are trying to do this for, there's a third party involvement, you know? And this is what I used to say to the interns, you know, when I was at the University of the Western Cape. I would say, okay, so there was some drunken brawl or there was some fighting, and then, you know, the young man comes to the counseling center. Then I'd ask, you know, but how do you know he's ready for therapy? Why do you assume that because there was a problem, therapy is required? This is very important, you know, and especially when it comes to when we are engaging with boys and men. But let me move on. So the next thing that I want to talk about is some of the action-orientated activities. How do I, because I have humanized, so the minute you bring culture in the room, masculinity is part of culture, all right? And so what we have done already, you know, even before the man came into the men's group, he knows now that this is a masculinized space, all right? And so in that therapy, when the men actually comes into the first session, before they even sit down, you know, there's some action and there's some team building and to promote social cohesion and to reduce anxiety. And so when a man then comes into the men's group and he is able to connect with another man at this level, with an activity, with having to do things together, that's consistent with masculine culture. The literature even confirms that men prefer to sit in a circle, you know, side by side, rather than, you know, looking into each other's eyes like more women, you know, it's quite a female preference. Not all women and not all men. But so part of what I do in the therapy is to actually action some of the activities. So in this was from a live session, all right? And what you're not seeing is that this 22-year-old, that he was crying. You can't see that, right? But he was crying. So as he was actually and you can see he's active. I'm making him get up and he's writing his feelings. And as he's writing his feelings, he's getting in touch with the emotions that he used to avoid with drug addiction. He has been terrorizing his very nice middle-class family for years with his drug addiction, all right? And so projecting feelings on a flip chart is what we do in a men's group as a group. So one of the activities that I like to do, I call it pairing past with present feelings. So instead of, of course, there's lots of discussion. I mean, men talk about their feelings just like women, all right? And so most of what probably happens is talking, even the presenting problems. Most of the problems that men bring into the men's group concerns people, relational issues, all right? Problems with the government, okay? So lots of marital, problems with relationship, problems with children, problems with authority figures, problems with the self, all right? But what I often do in a men's group, is that there might be a big, flip chart in the room, divided into two, and we start actually brainstorming, perhaps with one guy and the others are drawn in. And so he might be having a lot of difficult issues, say with his spouse, with his wife. And then we start, getting those feelings out. So how does she make you feel, right? And or he might, be writing it down, and we make a list, all right? And so some of the others can join in. Is this some feelings that you can identify with? And then in the other column, I may start asking, so when you go back to when you were growing up and you think of one particular caregiver, can you identify some of the feelings that you used to experience as a child? And those feelings goes down in the other column. And so in a very collectivist way, the participants start to recognize this continuity of their lives, that why is it, that I used to experience this as a child and now I'm experiencing this as an adult. So instead of just having this on a one-to-one or in a very verbal way, just looking at the chart and seeing your feelings reflected there, already, it actually starts to impact people in a different way. So there are many other, activities that I can talk about, but I think I want to end off here now, because so that there's some time for discussion. I think also, in terms of emotions, it's very important also to be a little bit more scientific about emotions, because to say, that men don't feel actually goes against the latest neuroscience about emotions, that we have 7 different types of emotion neurons that actually lines what they call our ancestral brain, right? And so boys, girls, men, women, we are all capacitated to feel a range of feelings. And in fact, we know that feelings are part of survival. That without feeling feelings, cognitively, something will be amiss, because our feelings actually help with clarification of reality. All right. So I'm going to stop there, and just as in closing, I want to say that in the current climate, of anti-male sentiment, I think men are the population who are most in need for us as therapists to consider a humanized foundation of therapy, that we can no longer, continue to practice therapy outside of people's cultural frames. Because I don't want to go into, all the ways in which psychology are challenged, by other disciplines, around the fact that we insist that feelings are strictly internal or strictly psychological. I mean, there's so much of, science that is actually clashing, with what is standard in our psychology training curricula. But perhaps, it's going to behoove us then to stay closer to the science of emotions, to be closer to an understanding of what makes therapy effective, because we know that the therapeutic alliance is central to effective therapy, and that boys and men may be different, but that they are as adept at engaging their emotions and self-transformation, depending on, whether we create a therapeutic context that makes it possible for their difference to be integrated into the therapeutic encounter. So I'm going to stop there, because perhaps I can't see if there's questions in the chat function. Thank you so much.
Shukran so much for that. So we do have a few questions. Somebody asks, if you as a woman run these men's group therapy sessions, how do you overcome the hurdle of being a woman in a group where men are supposed to feel free from those social expectations of behaving a certain way when they're in presence of women?
Very, very, very good question. All right. So that's a very good question. Are there others? Let me just...
You can have a look in the Q&A box as well as the chat box.
Okay. All right. Toxic masculinity. All right. For the learners, coming from a female in a male group. Okay, so let me talk about, because actually the woman in the men's group is a chapter in the book. All right. Remember that this therapy started as an accident at the University of the Western Cape. So I had to learn, I had to teach myself, about this therapy. And one of the things that I also had to find out is about being a woman in a men's group. So the first thing that I want to explain, if you understand group therapy, you understand that in group therapy, the source of transformation in a group is not the facilitator. The source of transformation are that's why we call them participant healers, because the most important people in that group are the participants, and they are concerned with each other. My role in the group as a group facilitator and as a psychologist, my role is as a technician. And so my job is as a techie to make sure, for example, that the quiet guys gets brought in when there's conflict, when somebody's projecting, that I need to, redirect his projection back to him so that he can engage, that he can take the projection back. So that's my job in a men's group. So in other words, the first thing you need to understand that the group dynamics, the most important people is the group, not the individual. And so I am peripheral, and I only centralize myself for certain group tasks. All right. The other thing about facilitating men's groups and being a woman is you must understand that the most important qualities for a group facilitator is to have skills, to have knowledge, to have experience. It is not your gender. So in general, when it comes to facilitating groups, the skills is more important than the gender. However, in a men's group, I would say that it is better for a man to be facilitating a men's group than a woman. And I'll explain why. A man directly affirms the masculinity of another man, whereas a woman indirectly affirms manhood. All right, let me explain. So as a woman in a men's group, in fact, the fact that I'm a woman and I'm running a men's group, it is saying that I am authorizing and that I'm allowing myself to be co-opted in a manhood project. So in other words, in other words, that as a woman, my job is to make sure that the men communicate and they heal through each other. And so what I find is that when I go and present at conferences like now, it's very interesting. I know that I will get that question. Whereas in a men's group, the men, the participants, they are not concerned with me. All right. They are concerned with each other because that's what I set up right from the beginning. Often they'll come in, because they trust me and they start speaking and they refer to me and I will nudge them away from me. Last thing I want to say about the role of a woman in a men's group. And so the second last thing, and because I want to say something about the mother with a baby boy. All right. But the other thing that I want to say is that, so there are special risks of being a woman in a men's group. For example, I think sometimes, the guys, they know more what's going on, around some of the stuff than what I do. That's okay, because it's their group, they confront each other. They support each other. They will say, no. Or, they correct one another or they confront, each other if they're less than honest, in their, particularly when it comes to, for example, with substance abuse, And so another guy will sit there and he will listening to this guy who's also dealing with substance abuse. And he will say, no, my bro, and they will correct one another. So I think it's really about understanding how you must bow and you must not interfere. And you as the woman must not be overwhelmingly present. You must know that the most important people there is the group, and it's the men's group, and it's masculinity. Last thing I want to say that I think is a fundamental that I also, had to learn with working with men and trying to understand my own, why is it that I am, attracted to this kind of work, is that all over the world, right? All over the world, in every culture, who are the people who receive little infant girls and boys? Are women, okay? And so the mother, and this is now in the revised theory of early gender identity development, psychoanalytic theory, is that the mother receives the baby boy, all right? And as she gazes into the eyes of her baby boy, because remember, most of development that takes place during that stage is unconscious. So as she gazes and she and the boy connects with each other, she affirms his difference from her. All right. And this is where you need to understand the importance and the significance of gender-based violence, because it is in that unconscious exchange when the mother has unprocessed male wounds, father wounds, male wounds, that when her baby boy is at risk, even unconsciously, because there's an exchange that takes place, because science confirmed that even now, while that fetus is in the womb of the mother, there's an exchange between the mother and the child, all right? And so round about the age of 18 months, around the age 2 years, that little baby boy, there's now a developmental dynamic that kicks in. And that little boy will now start looking for available men in his environment that he can bond with. And so depending on that mother, she can now facilitate or she can frustrate the little boy's natural impulses to want to start bonding with men in the environment. And so I'm going to stop there because I think that's for me where it gets interesting. So my job in a men's group is the same as the mother with a little baby boy, is that, and we know nowadays, we see it everywhere. We know the power of mothers, all right? We know that when a man struggles with access to his children, Professor Grace Kuno, she did that research, these custody battles, and she said, men do not stand a chance, all right? And so that is a chapter on its own, all right? I just wanted to touch on it. And so my job in a men's group is the same as the mother, is to assist men to turn to each other. Because you must remember, with the absence of fathers, it's a crisis. There are no men, there are no fathers. But men come into the room anxious, nervous, not having had that kind of male affirmation. Father hunger is at an all-time high. And so my job, I've got my hands full assisting, like the mother with a newborn baby. And when the baby begins to, start looking for a father, her job is not to frustrate that because she's got father issues. Her job is to ensure that that baby actually, gets an attachment and a nurturing from male others. So I'm gonna stop there. Thank you. Okay, I see there's some comments. Are there any other questions? Sorry, I can't I can't really see some of it. I can read some of it, but maybe if you can highlight if there's one more that I need to respond to, or is it there somebody that wants to talk to me? Are they able to speak directly?
So there is another question. You said, doctor, that men's image in society has always been set. Does in the modern world that view change with the rapid improvement of female development? Does it affect a male's role in a traditional sense? If you want to have a look at the question, you can just go to the Q&A box and then scroll down.
I'm reading it.
Okay.
I'm just wanting to clarify, what does it change a man's perspective about himself? Oh, I see. I'm not sure whether she means that, are men intimidated because women have become so educated, or is that what the question is? Or the guys asking?
Okay, the person who asked that, if you can just clarify your question, and in the meantime, we can just ask a different question.
Okay, so they're not able to engage verbally with me?
I could ask them to unmute if I find them.
So is there somebody who wants to engage?
There was someone who raised a hand.
Because I'm sure there are some mental health professionals in the room.
Okay, so I have
yes,
asked to unmute. We just ask that the person keeps their question short and to the point, please.
Okay, Aisha, yes, please speak to me. You are muted, Aisha. Aisha is muted. Let me just read.
Aisha, I've asked you to unmute, so if you can just unmute yourself, please.
Well, okay. I just also want to see in terms of the comments. You see, I don't think we understand the role of masculinity, the role of fathers. Some of what we can see ourselves, fathers engage children in a different way. The literature is clear. Mothering is not all that fathers need. Father is central, for example, in identity, all kinds of identity, including sexual orientation, sexual identity. Father is significant. And I think it is not just the physical presence of fathers, it's the emotional presence. Some fathers are physically present, they're not emotionally present, all right? Sometimes there are the kind of male-female dynamics between the parents where the father is not, the mother is too overwhelmingly present, the father's voice doesn't come through, or sometimes the father is so maybe bombastic and, doesn't allow for, so all of this affects the children's development, including their sexual identity, including their identity and how they feel. If a boy, for example, witness his father abuse his mother, this is extremely traumatic for a young boy, to witness his father abuse his mother, whether it is physically, emotionally, verbally, because remember, even at that young age, he's already socialized to be a protector. he watches and he's helpless. He's not, because of he's small, his strength, he doesn't have the strength to go up against his father. And so it can get so severe that this boy has difficulty identifying with the male gender because he's utterly disgusted with what he's seen. It's not verbal, he doesn't say it, but at the psychological level, this is what is happening. That is why family should never be mother, father, this nuclear family. Family is supposed to be mother, father, uncles on the one side, uncle on the other side, aunties on the one side, aunties, opa, oma, cousins. That children require a whole clan. It really takes a village to raise children. And so little boys and little girls need exposure to positive role modeling, male role modeling. All right. And so because it affects, we can measure father hunger. They've now got an instrument where they measure it. And so I think part of the problem is that, for myself, and going back, because that question was so important, but you're a woman, what are you doing in a men's group? Okay. I think that's very fair. What are you doing there? Okay. And this is actually how, some men often sometimes respond, at the beginning. What are you doing here? So I have to, explain myself, So, but I think we've become very matriarchal, very gynocentric, and we've lost an understanding of what the role. For example, what is the role of the father with the mother? Women are capable of aggression and very much relational aggression. And it's the role of the father to help the mother, in her function with the children. And so children can be at risk when they are also just exposed in this kind of feminine environment with women in terms of, women are, sometimes I have to say to people, you have to be very naive to believe that women are not capable of aggression. And it's also because we do not understand aggression, we do not understand violence. So there's lots of lack of knowledge when it comes to men and masculinity. All right. Sorry, I'm going on here. Is there any other question that I need to respond to?
Okay, we are unfortunately out of time, so we are going to stop here. But is there any way that people can maybe contact you if they want to?
All right, so let me just...
Or if you can maybe just mention about your book launch, and then we'll have to end.
Okay, all right. So in this book, then, for those of you who would like to have more information, I do deal with quite a bit, even that I saw some of the comments that I saw in the chat. I'm not sure exactly when the book is going to be launched. It has already been published by Unisa Press. It's called Masculinity Meets Humanity, an adapted model of masculinized psychotherapy. Maybe if I can just share the screen with my details. So it is best to email me, janses@unisa.ac.za, then I will be able to respond to you. I will be able to put you on a database, we'll come back to you, Poppy Act and everything, but put you on a database so that we can invite you to the book launch. So those of you who would like to come to the book launch, it's going to be hybrid. It's going to be both online and in person here at Unisa in Paro. So so please just take my details and then write me an email. That is the quickest for me to respond. Is there anything else that I before, or can I just close now? I just want to just have a quick look at the chat.
Yeah.
They asked that the details be shared on the WhatsApp group. Yes, I will give you the details and you can share it on your platforms. All right. So I'd really like to say thank you very much, Shukran, for asking me. I think there is also currently, there is a interview that was done on YouTube on the book, where I also speak to many of the things that I've touched on this evening. And what I'm also planning to do, because I can see there is a great need, I am planning actually to do a lot more talk. So I will always, share it with you on your platform, and then you can share it with part of your of the people. Thank you so much for asking me, and thank you to everybody who came to listen.
Shukran so much, Dr. Shahieda Jansen, and to everyone who joined us this evening as well. We thank you for being here. I also want to reward you for taking out your time and sharing your knowledge and your expertise and your time with us. I mean, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.